بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on the fiqh of food and drink. Last week we were speaking about miscellaneous ingredients which are permissible and those of them which are impermissible. And today, inshallah, we'll move into the discussion about cross-contamination. So the issue of cross-contamination and some basic rules and some of the verdicts of the ulama in relation to it. So, to begin, what is intended by cross-contamination? When we use this term, what do we mean? So cross-contamination, what we mean by that is when something which is halal, food which is halal, comes in contact with some food which is haram, and more specifically, food which is najas, impure, to which then the food which is halal becomes spoiled. So again, food which is halal in origin comes in contact with food which is haram, and more specifically, food which is najas, because not everything that's haram is najas. Food that's najas, and therefore makes the food which is halal now impure. So it's very important that we understand that part, purity and impurity. Because if something's haram, doesn't mean it's impure. Right? So if we take an example of something which is impermissible, like for example, we spoke about alcohol, and we said the scholar is different about the purity of alcohol. And we said that the correct view, it's not impure. So if alcohol comes in contact with food, it's not impurity that we're worried about. We're worried about the alcohol's taste. It's different. So impurity, mixing with purity, makes the food which is pure now become unfit for consumption. And so what we're really talking about is halal food that gets mixed with pork. That's exactly what we're talking about. Because if it's beef and chicken coming in contact, it's cross-contamination. But for the Muslims, we're not vegans, so we're okay with that. We're concerned about the pork. Because the ulama, they mentioned, the scholars, pork is impure by ijma', by consensus. And therefore, when Muslims are eating out, the concern is the food that we're eating. In places that sell pork, is our food being compromised? That's the question. Because even if we said there is some place that sells halal, for example, a fast food restaurant, or a place where many foods are sold. I want to order the halal, and it's also still haram. I have to be concerned about that. And it doesn't necessitate to hear that someone is eating Ahlul Kitab, the meat of the people of the book, because what if you're ordering potatoes, the place that sells both pork and potatoes, right? Or eggs or whatever else. So even your potatoes, it could be a risk. This is the mushkila. So the question first, we have to begin the principle we need. What does it mean, contamination? What's the qa'idah or the dhabit when it comes to contamination? What's the rule? When does contamination or cross-contamination occur? When does a pure item become najas? Like when they come into contact. Because it's not every time they come in contact. So here, the scholars, they say, and this is very important, the rule is that if something pure comes in contact with something impure, in which one of the two is wet, it's very important, one of the two is wet, then it becomes a concern of cross-contamination. Two items, one is pure, one is impure. If they come in contact with one another, a pure item and impure, so we'll use, for example, chicken comes in contact with pork, and one of the two is wet. Either both of them or one of the two. Then transferring is happening here. This here, najasa, impurity is being transferred. So this, the ulama, they mention, for the most part, the different madahib, we'll mention their views here. And the scholars agree if two pure, one impure item coming in contact, and both are dry, there's no cross-contamination happening. You see, it's very important. Many people, they mix these two. For example, somebody takes something dry, like bread, and they cut one bread with something that is dry, and you take the same knife to cut the dry bread, you cut pork, which is dry. They say there's no transfer between them because they're dry. Nothing's being transferred. It has to be wet for something to go from one to the other. And most of us, we understand this because we only worry about when something's wet, it's going to carry on. Because if you go beyond that, now we're going too much, right? If you say now, but there's particles or something, this is, no. Sharia doesn't go to that level. Then, موسوعة الفقهية الكويتية mentions, volume 40, page 94, وذهب الشافعي والحنابلة. The Shafi'is and the Hanbalis, the four madhabs agree, or they mention that if something pure comes in contact with something najis, impure, وأحدهما رطب وآخر يابس فيتنجس الطاهر بمناقاتها. That if one of them is moist or wet, comes in one of the two, and it comes in contact with the other one which is dry, then transfer of najasa has occurred. And this is according to the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis. Of course, other madahib, they have different, like the Ahnaf, the Maliki have slightly different conditions. And the word they use here is ratbun, moist. But the Hanabila make specific wet. They say not moist, it has to be wet. And so why is the difference? Because even if something is moist, it doesn't necessarily mean it's transferring. Right? Wet is clear, moist is not. So some madhabs said moist, like I said, both madhabs say moist, some say no wet. So what we take from this is that at least they agree too dry. There's no concern with too dry. One of the two has to be wet. And the word wet we're using, even though some say moist, because the Bahuti, for example, Alamat Bahuti from the Hanbali madhab, he says, this is a good example, he says in Kashaf al-Qina', for example, if someone takes a knife and cuts something najis, and before wiping it, goes and something else which is wet. For example, like someone cut a melon, he says. A melon is wet, right? You cut it. Then here we have wetness, which can be transferred, even though it's pure, the melon. Another example, he says, for example, you take something which is cut and it's just moist, not wet, like cheese. It's interesting. He specified cheese. And then you cut something else which is dry, there's no najasa transferred, he says. Kashaf al-Qina', volume 1, page 184. Why? Because the Hanbali saw wet, not moist. So that's helpful. Why? Because even if you argue, some madhab said moist is concerned, wet is, well, at least we can agree wet is being transferred. So with this definition, some of what we might imagine in our head to be cross-contamination isn't cross-contamination. Now someone goes and cuts a sandwich with cheese, and who else, whatever is else in it, and cuts another sandwich with the same. It's not necessarily cross-contamination. The concern we have is when we have pork, bacon, these kind of things which are on the grill and they're wet, or they're prepared and they still have their juices in there, then you cut that and you go and you cut something else. So with this definition being said, one of the two has to be wet. Our ulama then discuss various scenarios where this can happen. So this is the benefit we want to take. How can we understand the scenarios in which this happens? Or one of the two items is wet. This is the idea. So usually what we're concerned with, you have a knife, you cut pork, it's wet, you didn't wipe it, you go and you cut the halal item, now we're not going to eat that one. Or someone goes and they cooks something haram, like pork, on the grill or the pan, they don't clean it, and then they put the halal in there, we have a concern with that. And not just the Muslims, the vegans too are concerned with it. The vegans too, and they're the ones right now driving the force for more, better and stringent safety measures. First example we'll look at, if you have something halal like beef or chicken cooked on the same grill as pork which is impure, what's the ruling on that? So many fast food restaurants, this is their biggest concern. And I spent some time looking on the internet and reading a lot of forums and FAQs to find out how they cook these things. Because I'm not behind the grill, but we tried to find out. And obviously, it may differ from place to place, but we just judge based on what's mostly happening. So what happens nowadays, you order some kind of beef or chicken, which is halal, or even potatoes, right, or eggs, and they go and they cook in the same place, the same grill, which they cooked maybe the last order with pork. The mushkil now is that if the pork was on it, and the juices remained, you crack your egg on top of that, what's going to be the hal of that? Al-Lajnah Da'ima, the Permanent Committee of Saudi Arabia, was asked a question. Some American restaurants grill beef on the pork grill and chop beef with the same knife used for chopping pork. Is it lawful to eat the beef served at these restaurants? And the Permanent Committee says, it is not permissible to eat the beef grilled on the pork grill and chopped with the same knife used for chopping pork. So it's very clear. Because when you cook something like pork on the grill, it has residue, it's liquid. Obviously, if someone cleaned it, it's a little bit different. Right? If that's the proper way. If they cleaned it, we're all okay. But the problem is, do they clean it after every order? That's one of the questions that is still in the air. But then if we just take the way that they do it, they cooked somebody's last order, it's bacon, I order some eggs, they put it on the same grill, they cook it, they give it to me. For us, we say now it became impure if they didn't clean the grill before serving me that food. And this is the permanent committee saying this. So the concern then for the Muslim is, even if the food is halal, this will compromise that food that's being halal. And this is an argument of some of those who argue that it's not allowed to meet the meat Ahl Kitab. They use this argument. It's kharij mawdu', it's outside the subject, but it's a point of good reference. And even those who take the opinion that Ahl Kitab meat is halal, this is a concern. Right? So because what are we going to do with it? You can't just say, well, that doesn't happen. It happens. But how about when if we assume that they clean the grill after they do that? Then it's going to change the ruling. If they clean the grill after they put the pork on it, and the grill is the same grill but it's clean, inshallah it's halal. If it's cleaned it, it's no longer there. What if they use a different part of the grill? Right? Because we have to think about, okay, what if they use a pork, they cook pork on the top and the beef on the bottom? And this is actually some practice in some restaurants, that's what they do. They cook breakfast in the corner, top corner, and the rest of it in the bottom. If this happens, then inshallah we're also okay because there's no mixing. For vegans, they still have a problem. For the Muslims, say, well, there's nothing mixed. But let's assume that they cooked on the same grill, and before the next order, it dried. Some of you think, what about then? The grill is hot. How do you clean a grill anyways? Right? That's a good question. You're going to put water on it. You're going to let it just burn. It's just going to cook out. And then you put something else. Because obviously, if you ordered something with beef, you don't want beef that tastes like pork, I don't think any customer is going to accept that. Even non-Muslims, what is this? We ordered something else. So then, if that actually can happen, where it dries out, then one is dry, another is wet. All right, so example, now if we actually hypothetically argue the grill dried out, even after pork, and then you put some egg, is it haram then? What do you guys think? Is haram then? Because we said, in order for it to be najis, one or two has to be wet, other one is dry. But here now this is dry and I put my egg on it. My egg is wet, but this one is dry. There's no pork is not there anymore. So here, one of the fatwa bodies, which is the Fatawa Adar al-Ifta al-Kuwait, they actually asked the same question the Lajnah Da'ima was asked, the same question the Permanent Committee of Saudi Arabia asked. And you can find this in their book, Durr al-Bahiyya min Fatawa al-Kuwaitiyya. They said the same question. What's the rule on eating beef cooked on the same grill that is cooked with pork? Is it permissible to eat this? And what's the ruling on using the same knife? So they said if the grill which was used to cook pork dries جفت تماما بفعل النار فيجوز أكل اللحم الحلال مشويا عليها. Actually, that's their ruling. If it completely dries, right, by the heat, to which then you cook the beef on top of it, so the pork was cooked first, it dried, then the beef was cooked, they said then it's halal to eat it. As for the knife, it must be cleaned. And they mentioned, obviously, if the najasa has been cut with something else before, and we all agree that the knife should be cleaned, and that one's a little bit easier. So we see a different fatwa body arguing that if something else could happen, then possibly. And so now we have two scenarios then. One that we can for certain we agree. If anybody orders something in which this actually happened, the first scenario where the haram was cooked on it, then the halal was put on top of it, then it's haram. We all agree. But if a situation like the Dar Ifta al-Kuwait said happens, then it's possibly halal, right? Because the conditions are not met. What about the scenario where they cook on one side of the grill versus another? This is another possibility. So all of this is showing us something, which is there's a lot of shak. And therefore, avoiding that, for ahsan, this is better. If someone is fearful of this happening, avoiding it is better. Or asking them to do something for you, which is to clean the grill for your order, before you order. And you can do this nowadays. You can ask for anything you want. Because the same problem has happened in many of the big franchises. For example, McDonald's in UK is better than the McDonald's in Canada. If you go on McDonald's Canada, I just looked at it to see what the difference, because that's why we say the ruling depends on the situation you're in. Here, there's no concern about cross-contamination for some odd reason. The fries in McDonald's are vegan. That's actually unique. In America, it's not the case, right? Because some people said, what about the beef that's in the fries? I think most of you know that. McDonald's fries are the best fries because there's beef flavoring. You didn't know, some of us, right? That's why it's better than other fries. Not anymore, now, because vegans, they found out, they rioted, so they stopped that. So now they changed it. So the fries, we don't have that same problem. But when it comes to the cross-contamination of the sandwich, McDonald's Canada doesn't seem that they're concerned. Example 2019, McDonald's Canada was thinking about bringing in that impossible, right, or they call Beyond Meat, the meat that's not 100% not really beef, right, the one that's supposed to simulate meat. And the question was asked on their Twitter, and they said, is it going to be cooked on the same grill? They said yes. There's no concern, no solution. Where in the UK, if you Google it, it says we don't cook the beef. The beef is cooked separately, the pork is cooked separately. In fact, in the UK, the McDonald's, those which are halal certified, McDonald's in the UK are halal certified, some of them, the beef, the pork or the bacon is brought in already cooked. So the Muslims don't have to worry. Some people actually got upset with that. How can the Muslims are changing to McDonald's? I think it's money, right? But the point is, that's what's happening. So the UK is way different than us. And if you talk a Muslim world, UAE, Saudi Arabia, then we don't have to worry. There's no pork. And so if you go on the website, you'll see each country has a different way of dealing with it. So Canada, it's a real concern because this is actually on their website. So it's something which would say it's highly doubtful. So either a Muslim to deal with this mushkila of cross-contamination, we would hope the first scenario, the second scenario where it dries out to be preferable. But if we're not sure, either we ask them to try to clean the grill before you eat it, or what's ahwal, safer, so we'll eat something which is now doubtful. This is better. But can we say it's haram still? Not so easily, because we have two scenarios. Probability is there either way. So at the end of the day, we already mentioned the qawa'id. الطعام لا يطرح بالشك. Food is not rejected based on doubt, but we know when there's doubt, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us, leave out doubt for that which is not doubtful. So this is the best way to deal with it, because those people who don't eat Ahl Kitab or anything even on those regards, because of this, they have a strong case for safety and purity. But someone wants to say, but still the possibility is there. We agree, the possibility is there, and that person himself or whoever decides to take that position, they should be at least informed about that. Right? Because we see at least two different bodies, fatwa bodies have at least two different positions. One mentioning absolutely not, others say that if it's dried, then it can be halal. Then it moves to the next scenario. Halal food fried in the same oil as haram food. So this one is similar to the last issue, but slightly different. Which is that if we go to a fast food restaurant, they fry chicken or fries or fish in the same oil or certain oil, vegetable oil. But sometimes they may fry something haram in there possibly. So the first mushkila is, do they do this in most fast food restaurants? No. Most fast food restaurants, they don't cook pork in the fryer. So all you're going to really get is chicken or fish or potatoes or whatever. And usually they have separate ones. At least some websites say they have separate, and some of them say it's not the same. But let's assume someone went to order something fried, and there's the same problem. Lajnat Da'ima Permanent Committee was asked again. Again, all these fatwa on ifta.gov.sa in English, you can find them there. The questioner says, sometimes I eat at the student cafeteria, and of course I avoid the haram, prohibited foods, and sometimes order fried potatoes or eggs. However, one time I saw the cook frying eggs mixed most probably with pork in the same pan. Is it then unlawful for me to eat such eggs and potatoes? The Lajna said, the permanent committee, only if you're sure the food was fried in fat or oil in which pork had been fried, will it be impermissible for you to eat. So you have to be certain. Otherwise, this doubt is not good enough. Another fatwa they asked, that mostly foods like potatoes, fish, and the likes are fried in vegetable oils. However, some Muslims have here doubt that the lard, i.e. pork fat, may be used for this purpose, and it's difficult to verify this. What's your eminence advice? And the permanent committee says, the basic ruling is that all kinds of foods are lawful unless there's evidence proving that they contain lard or one of its derivatives. Accordingly, foods which are verified not to have any anything like that or lawful, a mere suspicion is not considered. So someone can't say there's a possibility, they boiled it or fried it in the same fryer. No, there's no proof for that. So this is important. So the asl is, even if you order something halal like potatoes and eggs and you didn't definitively see them or definitively know they did that, there's no argument for it to be haram. Because إِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ حَقِّ شَيْئًا. It's very important. Conjecture doesn't avail truth at all. And this is important because if you have clarity, clear proof, or, as you said before, if there's a doubt, then what at least you can do, you would be doubtful. But can you make a hukum, can you make a ruling based on that? No. And this is one problem that we have sometimes in the community. Some may say, but so-and-so I know used to work there. Yeah, does he work here too? It doesn't matter, right? He worked there. Does he work here? Or someone will say, the other person told me that. True, but does it affect my order now? You see, we always, when we make haram halal, you need certainty. Certainty. Otherwise, we're going to be based on suspicion and imagination. Because if you go online and check the websites, or you phone them, they tell you directly that they use different fryers for different things. So what are we basing the suspicion on? Our own suspicion. That suspicion can be based on rulings. Rulings can be based on suspicion. So here we see only for certain that this is happening most likely, or we know that it's happening, then it will be the case that the halal, which is cooked in the oil of haram, is haram. But most restaurants use vegetable oil, so that ishkal is not there. And someone said that, for example, chicken was fried before that with eggs. Yeah, and it doesn't make it haram for us, we said, because there's even an argument we argued before. Some of that, it was the ruling on the chicken, it goes back to that. You have a question, yeah? Mm-hmm.
And when we take out the pork, we didn't put another flavor inside because it's already cooked. And we also serve it to customers, even if the Muslim customers come and take it. Dude, they're not aware of it, and we never tell them, even if we tell them, because like the company that is different stuff. So in this situation, what I was doing is wrong, or
so that's a good question. The brother is saying that he used to work for one of the bigger restaurants or stores, and they did that. They're cooking the pork in the pan, and they put something else in it right afterwards, and the customer doesn't know. So obviously, we would say that for the safety, and also because nowadays the standards are much higher. Now, for example, if someone were to find out, they would get sued, right? If they found this out. So obviously, if you were the customer, obviously, you wouldn't be want to working there now as a Muslim cooking the pork, right? That's the first one. But if you say, in the case, then your duty would be to do it as the book suggests, which is to use new oil. But if a customer receives something like this, based on what we mentioned now, and they don't know, then they're not held accountable because they didn't know. And that's what's very important. If someone knew directly what you're doing, and then they will say, I don't want it until you use new oil. But if someone said, I ordered something like potatoes, and I don't know what they did, then I received it, am I supposed to doubt it, or am I supposed to eat it? I have to judge a parent. What's apparent to me, I can eat it. Until information comes otherwise. And that's the key. We'll talk about next week about restaurant etiquette, about asking about the origins of the food or not. Is it sunnah to ask what happened to it or not to ask? But this is a good point. If you know, it's different than you don't know. And that's the next point I mentioned. Shaykh Uthaymeen was asked specifically about this. What if I don't know what they did? And in his kitab Liqa'at wa Fatawa Aqalliyat al-Muslimah, page 611, he was asked a question that sometimes Muslims travel to non-Muslim countries. And the food there, the restaurants, they serve fried fish. In the oil which is cooked in it, something else, right, before that, like for example, pork. And we don't know if it was pork or not before. He says, after he mentions the ruling about food, he says, as for fish, then it's not a condition to slaughter it. We know the fish is already slaughtered out of the water. So it's permissible to eat it, even if it's made by non-Muslims, a Jew or Christian. As for the fat which is cooked in it, then we don't say to someone, leave off the fish, لِإِحْتِمَالِ أَنْ يَكُونَ السَّمْنُ سَمْنَ الْخِنْزِيرِ. We don't say leave it off because the possibility that the fat or the oil was pork oil. لأن الأصل في الحل بل نقول كله ولا حرج عليك لأن الأصل الحل. We say rather eat it, don't be bothered, or there's no blame on you because the origin is permissibility. Don't even have to ask. Why? Because the idea he's going to mention, and we're going to mention later on, Shaykh Uthaymeen held the view personally. We'll take at the end the question, just so we can finish everything. Now, Shaykh Uthaymeen held the view that Rasulullah, he didn't used to ask about the preparation, the food, once the food is generally permissible. And we'll get to that next week. So from there we see, at the end, like the last issue, if you have certainty, you have certainty. If you have suspicion, you don't act on suspicion. It's very important because once we start doing this, what happens? Everything could be haram. Even the halal could be haram. Why? Because then you're going to say, I don't know if the guy who was cutting the meat, the biha, forgot the basmala, didn't this and that, and so I might as well not eat that too. And this kind of doubt comes sometimes from someone who, instead of just following the ruling, has too much concern. Sometimes waswasa is there. Because if you go too much, follow the principles, and if you personally don't want to eat it because you still feel the halal is available, there's no doubt, that's better, safer, but doesn't mean it's haram, the other one. We always remember this fatwa, there is taqwa. Right? Fatwa is what halal haram. Taqwa is what? You follow what you should do. You follow the taqwa, but the fatwa is different. It's based on rulings. Because now if you start doing this, you're going to make a lot of things haram out of safety and cautionarity. I want to mention a point now. It's very important. Right? We should have mentioned this earlier. All the things that we're mentioning in this series, a lot of times you might have noticed we mentioned the ulama says something halal probably you never heard before. And some people thinking, well, what's going on here? Everything's come halal, I heard was haram. And the mushkil is that really comes down to methodology. If Ahlul Ilm are telling us something's halal, which all time you thought was haram, well, the real problem is us, not them. Because there's a narration authentic from Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah. It's a very valuable narration. He says that when it comes to making things haram, everyone can make something haram. It's easy, just say it's haram. That's it. Like an ilm, what's ilm? He says, rukhsa, it's an allowance, min al-thiqah. It's a very powerful statement. What's real knowledge? It's an allowance from a reliable person. Means really, when you go and ask someone fatwa, what are you asking? Here's the mas'ala, the shaykh who's reliable, either he's going to give you allowance or impermissible. You yourself didn't know what to do, so maybe you didn't do it. But when you ask the shaykh, when he says allowed, then you're like, wow, how did he do that? Bi'ilm. But nowadays, you may see that when we sit here and we talk about a lot of things, and outside the masjid, maybe everything was haram. Maybe now a lot of things became halal. Well, what's the difference? The mashayikh telling us something's halal, because that's real ilm. Real ilm is the one who can tell you when something is halal and when is not. Not the one who's excellent at making everything halal. It's a very important point, because now we don't want people to understand that the mashayikh are lenient. No, they have the ilm, whereas making something haram is easy. All you do is say, don't stay away from it, it's safer. Everything stay away from it, it's safer. But if you want an actual fatwa, you have to investigate. Last 2 points, which I will mention. Another example of cross-contamination is pizza. And the cutting of the pizza with the pizza cutter. This is a very common one that comes about. So now we know if you order halal pizza, right? First of all, is pizza halal? Yes. One of the mashayikh, they asked him that, he said it's halal. There's nothing against pizza. And some people, they brought some daif hadith about something, but it's nothing to do with pizza. So pizza is halal. There's nothing wrong eating pizza. Now the issue then is, if pizza is halal, the problem is when you're cutting the knife, with the knife that could have cut other types of pizzas. For example, someone ate pork or had a pepperoni pizza and they cut it and it's wet. That one's wet, right? And they're supposed to wipe the knife or have a separate knife, separate cutter. But these pizza stores, the brother mentioned before, sometimes the employees, they'll do whatever they do. So what do you do with this? First of all, what did Mashayikh say about this? Shaykh Uthaymin was asked this question as well, same book, Liqa'at wal Fatawa, Al-Qaliyat al-Muslima, page 614. He's a student. The question says, I am an expat or a foreign international student in a non-Muslim country. In some pizza stores, use the same knife to cut the big pizza, which the pizza before they pork. Is it obligatory upon me to request them to clean the knife from a sharia, they use the knife to clean the knife that is used to cut before or not? Do I have to ask? And this is important because Shaykh Uthaymin asked the question, because if we could just say, don't worry about it. The Shaykh says here that if the knife is used to cut pork, then it's not permissible to use that same knife except after cleaning it or washing it. Because it comes in the hadith of Abi Tha'laba al-Khushani radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the Rasul it was asked by him, Ya Rasulullah, inna fi ardi qawmin ahli kitab. Verily we live in the land of the people of the book. Should we eat from their vessels? He said, don't eat it or from it, except if you could not find anything else besides it. If that's the case, then you wash it, then you eat from it. And we'll come to that hadith next week again. This hadith of Abu Tha'laba al-Khushani. So the Shaykh Uthaymin, after mentioning the hadith, he says, therefore, it's obligatory, or it's a must, that the knife be cleaned or washed before cutting the pizza, or that they bring another one and they use a different knife. So this is the fatwa of the Shaykh, and we understand that nowadays in most pizza stores, which are proper, they have 2 different ones. One cutter for the non-meat or whatever it is, and one for it. Now what's the solution then, again, if we don't know? Because like I said, if we just say that we don't know, We don't know then, exactly. We can't make haram what we don't know. But what's my obligation? The Shaykh said that we have to know. We have to try to seek some kind of clarity. So the solution to that then is one of three. Right? Because if someone already got the pizza cut, then we're not going to tell them, look around, tawakkal Allah, we don't know. But if you have the choice, what do? You have one of three choices. Number one, make sure that they use dedicated cutter. You can call and say, do you guys have a separate cutter for the pizza? And if a good store will have it. If they don't, you say you should have it. Because even vegans are also concerned about that, like us. And others who have eating allergies. It's very important. Many people now have many types of illnesses. It's not allowed for them to do that. So you investigate first. Either call them or double check, do you guys do that? And most times they'll tell you. If you call them and you say, yeah, we do that. Second, when you're ordering, you tell them to do it. Now, this is called clean cut. You can write it down. You call it clean cut. You ask for a clean cut. Clean cut now is a restaurant terminology. It means clean the knife before they cut it. And it's something which is actually available in some stores, some pizza stores. When you order online, it tells you what kind of cut. You say clean cut. It actually tells you that. Allahu Akbar. They just clean it before they cut it. It's actually part of their lingo because vegans and people with allergies complained. And so what you do now is you just say, I want a clean cut. Remind them that. And they know what it is. If they don't know, just say, please clean it. Do a clean cut means cut it fresh. Wash the knife and cut it with freshly washed. Or use a different one. And this is helpful because this terminology makes it easy for Muslims and all those who have similar concerns. Thirdly, you ask them not to cut it. Right? That's the last case. If you're really doubtful, but then what are you going to do with a pizza that big? Right? So this is the last one. We'll say if you really don't want them to cut it, you can do it. Some people do that, they cut it at home. They have their own one. It's not ba'id, it's not far-fetched, but I would say two options are better. And wallahi, actually, if you notice, if you ask, you can get. So this is good, because Muslims should be at least have that concern. But now the problem is, what if you order pizza or someone brought you a pizza? You can't mix two scenarios. When I'm ordering, I have to be more diligent. But if someone just went and say, brother, I have pizza, should I ask them, brother, how you cut it? No, that's not behavior of the Muslim. Shouldn't do that. It's trustworthy Muslim. And what if the person brought you something that you don't know? Still, you go on the air, aside as long as halal. And that's for next week. So we're differing between someone who brought you food versus you when you're ordering. Last question I want to talk about issue is the manufacturing and cross-contamination. Now, companies have issues, which is that if they cook or they make halal products and haram products, many companies, manufacturers, make both on the same conveyor belt. So this is important for halal manufacturers, HMA and those groups. How do they certify a company is halal? They check how they produce the food. So they'll go to the factory and say, what do you make? And they'll say, we'll make these kind of goods. So some of the goods that they make are the halal certified and some are not halal certified. They go on the same conveyor belt. So the responsibility for halal certifiers and manufacturers is that they clean the equipment before its use. It's a benefit that we do agree. If hypothetically some najasa or something impure was made and then halal products were made after, it's an issue. But the scholars, they mentioned this is the practice for most halal monetary authorities. They will not produce halal goods from a manufacturing company except that they have to clean the conveyor belts, use gloves, etc. And this is why the Majma' Fiqh Duwali, the International Fiqh Academy, was asked, question 26, what is the ruling of using halal foods manufacturing facilities to manufacture non-halal foods frequently? If this is permissible, how are cleansing and removing impurities performed? Because now, let's say you want to open a candy company and produce halal candy. Where are you going to get the manufacturing from? Most people, they don't buy factories, they rent them. So this is why, if you're going to do that, they say manufacturing facilities for halal and non-halal foods must be separated. And if that's not possible, cleansing should be done with water and other types of cleaning products until it reaches purity and hence becomes permissible. So usually what they do is that they do the haram stuff or non-halal the first part of the morning or day, and the second day you do yours. Even now, if you go to the big butchers, that's what they do. They might not be able to process their own food. Maybe what they do is they slaughter it. But now I want to package it so I can sell it in the boxes. So what they do is they ask the company, when you guys finish yours, spray it down, wait a while, then we put ours. And that's okay. So it's a benefit to show that, alhamdulillah, the scholars in our community, they're doing these kind of things. And there's even a step beyond that, which is to do with packaging. Some halal and haram issues, but those are really rare. For example, someone has a packaging with adhesives, or the adhesives, halal or haram. These are more finer details that don't apply for the most part. Last point I want to mention is that we have to not worry about imagination. Right? So some Muslims, if you read some Q&A I was reading before the lesson, they were talking about vapors being captured in the oven, and sometimes, coming from the roof down. And we have a qaida fiqhiyya, la ibrata bitawahum. There's no ibrah, there's no consideration for fantasy and imagination. La ibrata bitawahum. There's a qaida. So if you put a pizza in the haram pizza in the same oven as a halal pizza and did two different pans, we should not be worrying about the vapors collecting and coming down. Because like I said, if you go to this level, nothing's halal. Right? Nothing's halal because now you don't know what's going to happen. This actually is being said by some people. And we tell them, what kind of consideration is that? And the Qaida Fiqhiyya teaches us that if something is just a tawahum, imagination, you can't make a hukum of it. For example, it's possible something happened. For example, they give an example. Let's say somebody passed away, now it's time to do the inheritance, and the heirs all appear. The Qadi's job now is to distribute the wealth for the heirs. But he can't wait and say, we don't know, there could be an heir somewhere out there, he didn't come yet. Now, in that case, we're not going to distribute the wealth. We're going to wait for the imaginary heir to come years later. No. La ibra tawahum. If he's not here, he's not here. And anyways, we have orders. So if he's not in the order anyways, we take him out. And this is important because if you start doing this, the ulama said then there's no actual rule you can make. You're always going to be waiting for imaginable possibility. So the case is that if something's really there, then you deal with it. Otherwise, alhamdulillah, our fiqh doesn't concern us. So inshallah, that's the major things to do with cross-examination. Next week, inshallah, we'll try to wrap up the series with discussion about restaurant etiquette. About the fiqh of the restaurants when you're going there, what you can and cannot do. For example, should you ask about halal certification? When you go there, you have to ask if someone brought you food from a restaurant, how it was produced. What do you do if you go to a restaurant, they sell pork, and they sell alcohol, and I want to eat inside. And these kind of fatwa, inshallah, we'll try to cover. Bidnillah ta'ala. Anyone has any questions, we'll take them. Yes, brother. So this is a good question. We covered it some time before. In Islam, can we eat exotic animals? In Islam, all animals are permissible except for those which the legislation said is not. And we said those are the animals which are of two major categories. One, the animals with fangs, right? So wild beasts, and birds with talons, claws. Those are haram. Those are impermissible. But duck is permissible, right, in Islam, right? Because it doesn't fit into those categories. And provided that the meat is not harmful for us. Like it's not something if you eat it, you're going to get sick, or it's poisonous, or something like that. But yeah, other than that, we can eat other animals. Also, if the country allows you, so you don't want something illegal, but yes. So duck is permissible, etc., and these other things. And so, alhamdulillah, most of the meats are halal in Islam. Allahu a'lam. Yes.
I know you're translating in English, but with regards to terminology, first of all, contamination, what was the exact mustalah?
They used the term tanajjus. This is what they use. Yeah, just tanajjus, because it's not it's like najasa. Yeah. So yeah.
When wet and moist, you said ratab, and what was moist?
Yabis. Ratab is moist. Balal is the wet. Yeah, and yabis is the dry. Exactly. So the differentiation between these two, yes.
Looking into like the ingredients on items that are already generally considered permissible, like cheese, is this similar to like going beyond and asking about, like looking at the ingredients and asking, is that like the same thing?
So say it again. So those are.
Like looking into like every time you buy food, you look at the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Does that come from like waswas, or is that something?
That's a good thing. So even though we agree that something's apparently halal is halal, it doesn't negate that you could ask and to look in more just to ascertain there's nothing haram in there. Because it could be the case that there is something which is halal, but there's something else they put in there. And I was negligent. I just picked that up and said this cheese is halal, even though it's true, just to make sure that this cheese is not a cheese that has something else. Because every time they change in the market. Right? So the ulama, some of them, they have two views. Some say you must check the ingredients. The permanent committee, like actually make due diligence, and others they say as long as it's generally from the halal categories, you're good to go. But to be honest, as we see the market changing, every Muslim who wants to be safe, do due diligence. Read the ingredients just to make sure, even though it's halal, just to check, and also you can check other things too. Maybe it's not, pure or like sort of healthy or not, but it's good to do that, and it's not wrong. We'll take one more question from here, then we'll take from there. Someone asked, some people bring forth the question that if there is cross-contamination that we don't know about, the haram still has an effect on your spirituality. Is this correct? So the question, if something is in the food we don't know about, is it going to affect my iman? And it's not the same as someone who ate haram and it affects their iman. So the hadith of Abu Hurairah, we know hadith Sahih Muslim, the person whose food is haram, his clothes is haram, this is clear haram. If someone who ate something doubtful, we can't say it's going to affect his iman because doubtful doesn't make it haram. It's like saying, for example, some of the fuqaha, they debated if certain animals or food is halal or haram. Some say makruh, some say halal. If we start saying that the makruh one affects your iman, the mashayikh were eating it. Right? So this is not the correct understanding. Rather, the correct understanding is if it's a haram or someone deems it haram, like their own view after studying it, then it's going to affect you. Otherwise, then we're going to start forgetting difference of opinion amongst Ahlul Ilm. And that's why the scholars, even those who said it's haram, Allah says halal, there's leniency scholars had. For example, we said last week, red wine vinegar and white wine vinegar, the group that said it's haram to make it and to use it, and those who said it's allowed, the ones who made it, based on their view, the other ones could still eat it. Look at the kind of justice that they have there. So we would say that this kind of argument then it opens the door to a bigger problem, which is if the scholars differ, viable difference of opinion about food, and we say even the makruh is going to harm your iman, makruh is not haram. So that's a bit too much, and it's not going to help accommodate all the khilaf that we're talking about. Rather, we say that if something is doubtful, it's better to avoid, but not haram. But if it's haram, you have to avoid, but that impacts your iman. That's dangerous. Let's say, no? Okay.
The religious them in Kuwait say that the pork is dry, then if you cook meat on it, it will not be.
So
is it when they put the meat, it's gonna be wet? So would that be?
So good. So what they're saying is when the committee of Kuwait said that if the grill is dry, so you're right, not the pork is dry, the grill is dry and the other one is wet. So now you have a dry grill, not dry impurity. So that's the difference. And so that's a good point. So it has to be dry, nothing on it, then you put the wet. So now it's two different things. Yeah. So that's what they were saying. Yes.
So what did they say about washing? Because grill and knife, usually what they do is just wipe it out.
Yes. So the scholars say if it's wiped or washed, that's fine. So najasa can be removed for wiping or washing. So usually what they do, they use a wet towel or they just wash it. So we say if they clean cut, it's one of those two. I understand what they mean by clean cut. Either they wash it or they'll wipe it. And scholars say here, like I read, they say either washing or wiping. So as long as they want to, because the najasa is gone. That's all you want. You want to remove the najasa. Yeah, any other question? Yes. So Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah authentically reported that he said that everyone is proficient in making something haram. Like in ilm, he said knowledge is a rukhsa. It's a allowance min al-thiqah. Real knowledge is an allowance from one who's trustworthy. Means a scholar who can tell you when something is halal. That's the alim, not the one who can tell you it's haram, because we all know if I'm doubtful, haram. Right? So for example, all of us are specialists at that. If someone asks you something you don't know, just stay away from it. Everyone can do this, mashallah. It's the easiest fatwa. But the real one is that when somebody asks you and you actually can tell them why it's halal and trustworthy, that's actually knowledge. And why I'm saying this, because if you look at what we're saying, all of these lessons, you may probably think, how come all the things that I grew up eating or thinking they're haram all of a sudden became halal? The mushkil is us. We were proficient in making things haram, and then we went to Ahlul Ilm and they made it for us halal. And that's what we need today to also realize that people of knowledge, they're looking at things from their evidential point of view and they make our life easier. But it doesn't mean that the same group of scholars are going to make halal everything. Maybe in this chapter and that chapter something else. So we need to always go to the reliable one to get the correct answers. Because this saves us a lot of problems. So this is a very powerful statement that helps to explain, at least methodologically, why a lot of things you heard here, you didn't hear before. Yes?
You mentioned the Shafi'i company view where something halal here you mentioned
The others, they have a slightly different view, so I have to double check. I don't have it written, but they have some details. Some of them, they make difference between wet and moist. Some of them, they differ over, they all agree if it's too dry, it's not pure. But I have to double check with the Hanafis and Malikis. I didn't copy it here, so next week I'll bring what they said. So they can read all of the opinions. Now, yes.
Does this not apply for things that are not just like cow and beef and fish or something?
So it's a good question. Does it apply to that which is not najis? For example, haram beef. For example, beef was not slaughtered properly, and then fish. So we will say it's not najis unless someone deems that to be dead meat. But the question now is, like we said before, going back to all those issues we said, the Ahl Kitab issue does dictate a lot of issues. So if someone deems the meat of Ahl Kitab to be mayta and najis, then then it will be. But obviously, this is not, even the scholars who dispute it, they're not going to go to that level, say that that's now najis transferring. But they do agree that it's not, some of them do call it mayta, dead meat. So you're right, if somebody's view is Ahlul Kitab meat should be avoided altogether, then they themselves will be, from first get-go, wouldn't come near any of this. Because for them, what they're more worried about is the contamination of pork, beef, and chicken. But again, we could still go on the bottom line, which is that, what if the same view you hold, and you put eggs and potato on the same grill where there's other things on it, then you could still have the argument. But you're right, it depends on their ruling there, because some scholars say the Ahlul Kitab meat is dead meat, some they say it's doubtful meat, some say it's a halal meat, so that's where they differ on. But here specifically we are talking about pork, since it's agreed upon and all agree upon. But for the Ahlul Kitab meat, then we have to first decide yourself, where are you on that spectrum of the argument. Wallahu a'lam. Any other questions? طيب إن شاء الله. Next week we'll continue. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.